he forgot his past and became the town's greatest hero, asterisk. The sun was high and hot, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes the dust feel heavier. The wind barely moved, just enough to carry the dry scent of dirt and horses. That's when Elle saw him out on the side of the road, lying face down in the dirt like he'd fallen from the sky. No name. No past, just blood, dust, and silence. Elle pulled his horse to a stop, climbed down slow, and crouched beside the man. His clothes were torn and faded like they'd seen too many days and nights without rest. There was a deep cut on his forehead, and a scar near his collarbone, old and pale. But the man was breathing barely. That was enough. Elle didn't ask questions. He lifted the man up, set him on the horse, and took him back to town. By the time they reached Maisonville, folks had already gathered around the general store. It wasn't the kind of place where strangers showed up often, especially ones who looked like they'd been dragged through hell. An old man with gray hair stepped forward. His hands trembled. His eyes locked on the stranger's face like he was seeing a ghost. He whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "Tom?" Nobody else said a word. "That's my boy," he said, voice cracking. "He's come home." The man didn't speak, didn't say yes or no. He didn't know. His head throbbed, and everything before waking up in the dirt was gone, like the pages of his life had been ripped out. But in that moment, he saw something in the old man's eyes. Hope, maybe even love. So he stayed silent. They gave him a room above the pharmacy and food on his plate. They didn't ask for much, just let him rest. The next morning, someone called him Tom, then someone else. And then it just stuck. He didn't know if that was his name, but he didn't have another one to offer. Later, Elle said, "A man without a past still needs a name. Let's call you Jack." And so Jack it was. The town moved slow, like most places that far out. Kids played in the dusty streets. A dog barked near the blacksmith shed. Wagons creaked by under the weight of supplies. Life carried on, even with a stranger in their midst. Jack spent most days sitting on the porch, watching, trying to piece together the fragments in his mind. Nothing came. Just flashes, horses, darkness, gunshots, but no names, no faces. Still, he helped where he could, carrying buckets, fixing fences, replacing broken windows. He didn't say much, but he worked hard. Some of the men gave him long looks, like they weren't sure. Some of the women whispered, but nobody pushed him away. Not yet. And then there was her Marianne. She stepped out of the schoolhouse one morning, soft blonde hair pinned up, dressed clean and simple. She stopped when she saw him, just looked. No smile, no words. Like she was waiting for something that might never come. She was supposed to marry Tom. The real Tom, but he'd left for war and never came back. For years, she'd carried that pain, quiet and deep, like a weight tucked inside her chest. When word got out that Tom was back, her hands shook. Her breath caught, but she didn't cry. She just went to see for herself. She walked into Hank's house and stood there looking at Jack. He looked like Tom, not exactly, but close enough to hurt. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Out. She turned and walked away. Later, she stood on her porch with her hand pressed to her chest. Her heart beat hard, fast, like a warning. But underneath all that fear, there was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. As days passed, Jack became part of the rhythm. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. He still didn't know who he was. But maybe, just maybe, that didn't matter as much anymore. Because sometimes it's not about who you were. It's about who you choose to become. But when the truth starts to come back, piece by piece, the man he was and the man he's becoming may not be the same. Asterisk. Jack didn't talk much. He listened, he watched. In the early mornings, he sat on the porch outside Hank's house, drinking coffee that was too bitter and too strong. The kind old man still called him son, with a softness that made Jack's chest feel tight. like he was borrowing something that didn't belong to him. Most days, Jack walked, just wandered the edges of Masonville like he was trying to memorize every corner of it. His legs moved even when his mind didn't. The town was small, just a few dirt roads, a general store, the blacksmith shed, a schoolhouse, and the broken old saloon that hadn't seen a full room in years. People nodded at him, some stiffly, others unsure. He understood that after all, he didn't know who was either. But when the schoolhouse roof began to sag, he didn't wait to be asked. He just grabbed a hammer and climbed up. The kids inside pressed their noses to the windows. A few teachers whispered. One stood out front, arms folded. Marianne. "Be careful, Mr. Caldwell." She called out. She hadn't meant to use the name. "I'll give him." It just came out. Jack nodded without looking down. There was something about the way he moved, careful, focused, steady, like a man who didn't need to say much because he had nothing to prove. And slowly, the town began to shift. Few men started greeting him by name. The blacksmith grunted and offered him a horseshoe one morning, motioning toward a mare that needed a trim. At the general store, a woman asked if he could lift a crate onto the wagon. Nothing big, just the kind of things you ask someone you've come to trust. Jack never asked for anything back. He didn't talk about his past because there was no past to talk about, just a wide blank stretch of nothing in his head, but being useful? That gave him something. At Hank's, he fixed the squeaky steps, painted the front fence, dug a new line for water flow when the rain made the path too muddy. You work like you're trying to be forgiven, Hank said one evening, not looking up from his whittling knife. Jack didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because maybe he didn't deserve to. The only time he felt peace was in the saddle. He'd ride Elle's spare horse out to the ridge and sit still, watching the horizon. The silence out there didn't ask anything of him. It just let him breathe. One day, while helping the blacksmith load scrap wood behind the shed, Jack spotted a child struggling with a broken wagon wheel. He knelt down, showed the boy how to fit it right, and patted him on the shoulder without a word. That boy told his mother, who told the baker, who told the schoolteacher, and by nightfall someone at the saloon said out loud, "He may not be Tom, but maybe he's what we needed now." No one disagreed. And Marianne? She watched from a distance, quietly. She noticed how Jack never turned away from a task, how he stayed late to stack chairs outside the schoolhouse or fix the squeaky hinges, how he smiled only once when a dog followed him all the way from the creek and fell asleep. His boots. She couldn't make sense of her own heart. She told herself not to care, not to look. But something inside her shifted when she saw him holding a child's hand to guide him across the road. It wasn't the face she remembered. It was the feeling. It scared her. She didn't know what hurt more. That he wasn't Tom. Or that maybe it didn't matter as much as she thought. That evening, Jack sat on the porch with Hank. The light was soft, falling golden across the town. "You ever feel like you were dropped into the wrong story?" Jack asked quietly, barely above a whisper. Hank didn't answer for a long time. Just rocked in his chair, his eyes far off. "No," he said finally. "I think you were dropped right where you needed to be. Maybe the story just hadn't caught up to you yet." Jack looked out at the town, at the cracked saloon, the soft lamplight from the schoolhouse window, the flicker of Marianne's figure behind the curtains. He didn't remember where he came from. But for the first time, he wasn't chasing. "That anymore, because here?" He was starting to feel like someone. Not Tom, not a ghost, just a man named Jack, trying to build something out of the broken pieces. And for now, that was enough. It was a quiet morning just like any other. The kind where the breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery and the hammering at the blacksmith shop echoed through town like a steady heartbeat. Jack was crouched near the back of the general store, fixing a loose latch on the storage door. His hands were steady, focused, until a voice from behind stopped him cold. "Where's your mark, son?" Jack turned slowly. An older man stood just a few feet away, straight-backed, dressed in a worn uniform with faded buttons and eyes sharp as flint. His name was Archie Morgan, retired cavalry. Everyone respected him, and no one ever dared speak over him. The brand, Archie continued, his voice low. Every soldier who served near the frontier was given one. Back of the neck, you don't have it. Jack blinked, confused. Then, like something inside him cracked, he reached up behind his collar. Nothing. Just skin. He didn't say a word. Archie didn't either. He just gave Jack a long, searching look and walked off, tapping his cane along the wooden boards. But the silence he left behind? That stayed taut by evening. The whispers had already started. I heard he doesn't have the mark. Well, maybe he got discharged early. Hank swore that's his son. Who are we to argue? You ask me, something doesn't add up. Jack felt it every glance, every half-stopped sentence when he walked into a room. The quiet suspicion that had once faded. It came crawling back like smoke under a door. He tried to shake it off. Tried to keep working, keep helping, keep building what he had. But it was harder now. The weight in his chest grew heavier with each passing day. And then one afternoon, while clearing out the back of the old saloon, Jack opened a crate filled with broken wood and dusty bottles. He reached inside, pulled out a frame, and wiped. The glass clean with the sleeve of his shirt. He froze Dot. It was a photograph, old and yellowed, but clear. 3 people. A young man in uniform, standing tall. A woman beside him in a pale dress, smiling just enough to break your heart. And an older man, hand on the boy's shoulder. Jack stared at it. Dot. The young man was Tom. The woman was Mary Ann. And the man was Hank. Dot. He looked just like the person they thought he was. Almost identical. But not quite. Dot. It hit Jack like a punch in the gut. That life, the life of the boy in the photo, was never his. But it could have been. Or maybe, in some strange way, he'd stepped into it without meaning to. And now here he was, standing in the middle of someone else's story. He didn't hear her footsteps until she was already behind him. Dot. Mary Ann. Dot. She glanced around the room, brushing dust from her dress. Looks like progress, she said softly, her voice carrying. A quiet warmth. Jack didn't answer. He just handed her the photo. She took it slowly. And when she looked down at the faces, something inside her stilled. This was the year before he left, she whispered. I really thought we'd have a simple, happy life. She didn't cry, but her voice carried the sound of someone who had cried too much for too long. She looked up at Jack. Her eyes didn't accuse. They didn't even question. They just looked. Dot and Jack, for the first time, didn't try to be anyone. He didn't smile, didn't pretend. He just stood there, holding the same silence he'd arrived with. And maybe that was what scared her most, that she was starting to feel something again. And it wasn't for the boy in the photo. Dot. It was for the man standing in front of her now. Dot. Jack went for a walk that night. Not down the main road, but behind the church, where the earth was marked with names carved in stone. He stopped at a grave near the back. The letters were worn but still clear. Thomas J. Hargrave, son, soldier. A man of honor. 8 years gone. Jack knelt down, removed his hat, sat in silence for a long time. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. Didn't plan to step into your place. The wind moved slowly, like it was listening. But here I am. Folks believe in me now. Hank, Mary Ann. The kids at the school, they call me Jack, and I want to be worthy of that. He reached out, fingers brushing the name etched in stone. I'm not trying to take your life. I'm just trying to build my own, with the pieces that were left behind. When he stood and walked back to town, something had shifted. The guilt didn't vanish, but it changed. It didn't feel like weight anymore. It felt like responsibility. And deep down, maybe that was the first real thing he remembered, not from his past, but from who he was becoming. Not a shadow, not a lie, just Jack. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Asterisk. The sun had barely cleared the hills when Jack stepped outside, stretching his sore shoulder. He'd spent the last 2 days rebuilding part of the saloon walls with fresh timber, not because anyone asked him to, but because he needed to keep his hands busy. Idle time left too much room for thinking. That morning felt different. The air was thicker. The wind didn't move right down at the edge of town. A horse appeared on the trail. Just one. Rider tall in the saddle, moving slow like he wasn't in a rush because he already knew where he was going. The horse's hooves clapped against the dusty street, like warning drums. Jack saw him before anyone else. Froze in place. His heart didn't pound. It dropped. A man dismounted in front of the general store and glanced around like he owned the place. Dust clung to his coat, hat pulled low. A grin curled on his face, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind that made your stomach not dot. His name was Bart Mason. Jack knew that face. And Bart sure knew his. They had ridden together once long before the dirt road and the town that had taken Jack in. Back when money came from dangerous men and dangerous jobs, and the laws were loose if you had enough bullets to back your word. Jack didn't remember everything, but he remembered enough. Bart didn't head for the store. He went straight for the saloon, the very one Jack had been rebuilding with his bare hands. Jack met him halfway. Well, I'll be, Bart said with a dry laugh, if it ain't Jack Caldwell. Or should I say, the man who used to go buy something else. Jack didn't move. Turn around. Right out. Bart smirked. Oh, come on. That any way to treat an old friend? You're not a friend. You've done well here, Bart sighed, looking around. New town. New face. Got yourself a little respect. A woman, too, I heard. Jack's fists clenched. Not out of fear, but out of the sinking feeling that everything he'd built could crack open at any second. Bart reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, dirty, crumpled, but still readable. It was a bounty poster. Jack's face. His old name. The reward. They're still looking, Bart said. Now, I ain't here to collect, not yet, but I do need something. A little coin, a little kindness. And in return, I keep my mouth shut. You keep your life. Jack stared at the poster. The man in the drawing looked like him, but didn't feel like him anymore. That man was a ghost now. I'm not running anymore, Jack said finally. You sure? Bart grinned. Because once I start talking, they'll all run from you. Bart tipped his hat, backed up a step. I'll be around. Think about it, partner. He walked off like he hadn't just ripped a hole in everything Jack had rebuilt. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat on the porch outside Hank's, the stars watching silently from above. The weight in his chest was back. But this time, it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Not for himself, but for the people who had taken him in. He couldn't keep it inside anymore. So he walked down the road, past the general store, toward the small house by the schoolyard. He knocked once. The door opened almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. Marianne stood there, wearing a plain dress and no expression. Her eyes met his, calm and steady. I need to talk, he said softly. They sat on the porch side by side. The night air was cool now and quiet. Jack stared at his hands like the words were buried in his palms. My name's not Tom, he said. It never was. Marianne didn't flinch. Didn't gasp. I'm not a soldier, Jack continued. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who woke up in the dirt with no name. When Hank called me his son, I didn't know who I was. But I couldn't say no. I didn't know what was real, but I knew how people made me feel. And here, I started to believe maybe I could be someone better. Marianne looked straight ahead, her voice low. You knew it was a lie the whole time? Jack nodded. At first, no, then yeah. And I was scared of losing what this town gave me. Scared of hurting you. She didn't speak right. Away, just breath slow, eyes glassy. Why now? She whispered, because someone showed up from before. He knows who I used to be. He's threatening everything, and I won't run. I can't, even if everyone turns their back on me. He looked at her. I'm staying, because of who I've become, with you or without you. But I won't betray this place. Marianne turned to him. Her hand reached out, soft, shaking. Her fingers brushed against his, just for a moment. "You didn't betray us," she said. "You betrayed yourself." Then she stood and went back inside, closing the door behind her. Not with anger, but with something heavier. Jack stayed there. Night stretched around him like a long, silent truth. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew this much. He wasn't leaving, not anymore. That night, the wind changed. And moved faster through Masonville, whistling under doors, knocking shutters against windows. Clouds gathered above like bruises forming on the sky. Even the dogs were quiet, ears turned to the dark, like they sensed something coming before anyone else did. Jack had barely slept the night before. After the truth spilled out to Marianne, he'd sat on the porch until sunrise, eyes fixed on the horizon, heart pulled in every direction. He didn't know if she'd tell the town. Didn't know if anyone would speak to him tomorrow, but now it was tomorrow, and no one said a word. People still nodded at him. Some smiled small, like nothing had changed. Hank gave him coffee without asking anything. Even Elle tossed him a rope and said, "Barn roof needs patching." It felt too calm, too quiet. The kind of stillness that comes right before the storm. Later that day, Jack helped Hank stack lumber behind the old shed. His hands were moving, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept glancing down the road, toward the hills, like something was pulling at the edge of his vision. That's when he saw them, 5 riders. Dust trailing behind them like smoke. They weren't in a hurry. They moved slow, confident, like men who knew exactly what they came for. Jack's blood turned cold. He didn't wait. He dropped the lumber, grabbed Hank's arm. "Get inside." By the time the riders reached town, folks had started to notice. Doors closed, windows shuttered. Children pulled off the streets, but it wasn't enough. Jack ran to the saloon and grabbed the rifle he kept hidden behind the bar. He checked the rounds, loaded quick, then sprinted toward the middle of town, yelling, "Men to the saloon. Women and kids to the schoolhouse go." People moved fast. Not because he gave orders, but because they trusted him now. Trusted the man who'd fixed their fences, climbed their roofs, taught their kids to ride. Hank was slower. Jack tossed him a spare rifle. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked. Hank's hands were shaking, but his jaw was set. "You ain't Tom," he muttered, raising the rifle. "But damn it, you're still my son." Jack's throat tightened, but he didn't have time to feel it. Because just then, the first shot cracked through the air. Chaos broke loose. The gang split into 2-3 came from the north, firing at windows and trying to spook the town. 2 more circled around the schoolhouse. Jack didn't think. He moved. He tackled one rider near the livery, knocked the gun from his hand, took a blow to the shoulder, but kept going. Marianne was herding children into the school, yelling for them to stay low. Jack stood at the door, firing past the fence posts, covering her as she locked the last child inside. A torch flew across the sky. Someone tried to light the barn. Jack ran. The fire caught, but only on the outside wall. He knocked the rider off his horse, rolled through the dust, and stomped out the flames before they spread. Smoke and shouting filled the town. Jack's shoulder burned. He didn't know if it was from the fall or the bullet that grazed him earlier. Maybe both. It didn't matter. He wasn't protecting himself anymore. He was protecting his people. By the time the riders were grouped, they realized something was wrong. This wasn't a scared town anymore. It was a town that stood its ground. Jack Caldwell was in the center of it. Bart rode forward, rifle raised. He fired once, missed. Jack didn't. His shot hit Bart's leg. The outlaw fell hard, dust flying up around him. Jack limped toward him, guns still raised. Bart looked up, blood on his teeth, and laughed. "You're not even that man they think." "You are." Jack stared back, calm. "I don't need to be." Bart spat and gave a sharp whistle. The rest of his gang turned and bolted, riding hard, fast, away from the town that refused to break. By morning, Masonville was scarred. Smoke still hung in the air. A few buildings burned, but not to the ground. People were shaken, bruised, but alive. Jack walked through the street. Blood dried on his sleeve, face cut across the cheek, but he was still standing. And for the first time since the day he woke up in the dirt, people didn't look at him like a stranger, they looked at him like one of them. Later that afternoon, after the dust settled, Jack returned to Hank's house. The old man had been shot in the side, but he was alive. A local nurse sat beside him, dozing in her chair. Jack didn't wake him. He wandered to the shelf in the back room and spotted a small wooden box. Something about it pulled him in. He opened. It carefully inside were letters, dozens, faded from time, tied neatly with ribbon. He untied one. The paper crackled softly in his hands. Mama, if I don't make it back, just know I did this for the ones I love. For Dad, for Marianne. I believe even if we lose ourselves, if we save others, we're not lost for nothing. Jack sat down, the letter in his lap, his chest tight. Tom had died with honor. Jack had lived with shame. But now after this, he understood something. He didn't come to replace Tom. He came to complete what Tom started to protect. To serve. To love even with no name, no past, no promise. Jack Caldwell hadn't been born in this town. But last night, he earned it, and that, he knew, meant more than any name ever could. 2 days passed. The smoke had lifted, but its memory still hung in the air. Wooden boards covered bullet holes. Burn marks ran along the side of the old barn. A few windows were shattered. A fence post still leaned where it had been crushed by a spooked horse. But the people of Masonville moved on, slowly, with bandaged arms and stiff gaits, carrying themselves like folks who had seen the worst and chose to survive anyway. And Jack? Jack stayed. He didn't ride off. Didn't hide, he moved through the town quietly, helping where he could, nodding at those who looked at him a little longer than before. He wasn't sure if it was trust in their eyes or doubt. But nobody had run him off. Still, the silence around his name was heavy. On the third morning, while Jack was patching the saloon wall, hammer in one hand, shoulder still sore from the fight, a rider came into town from the south. This one wore a long duster and a badge that glinted in the sun. Sheriff Miles Randall. From the next county over, he rode slow, straight-backed, old but not weak, eyes sharp beneath his brim. People stepped out of the way as he passed, some watching, some whispering. He dismounted without a word, tied his horse to the post, and walked straight toward the saloon, toward Jack, the hammer in Jack's hand. Went still. He didn't run, didn't pretend not to see him. The sheriff stopped just a few feet away, boots crunching against the dirt. I know who you really are, he said flatly. Jack didn't flinch. He just nodded once. I won't deny it. The wind blew light through the street. Someone closed a door behind them. Someone else peeked through a curtain. I'm not the man folks thought I was, Jack said, voice low but steady. But I never faked who I became here. I did the best I could. I protected them when it counted. I stayed when I could have run. The sheriff looked around at the patched-up storefronts, the soot on the schoolhouse roof, the porch where Marianne stood with a broom in hand, frozen halfway through sweeping. At Hank, sitting in his chair by the window, pale but alive. He took it all in slowly. Then after a long pause, the sheriff nodded. You've done more for this town than most. Men wearing stars, he said. If every wanted man turned out like you, I'd be out of a job. He pulled off his hat, wiped his brow with the sleeve of his coat. I don't see a crime here, he added. And if anyone asks, I won't recall ever knowing your name. With that, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off. No papers. No cuffs, no questions. Just a clean breath of air in a town that had held its lungs for far too long. Someone clapped. Then another. Soon the sound grew, quiet but certain, hands coming. Together, not in celebration, but in agreement. In respect. Jack didn't smile. He just stood there, eyes meeting theirs. One by one, he hadn't asked for applause. He hadn't begged for forgiveness. He'd simply stayed, and now he was theirs. That night, the saloon was quiet again. The hammer lay beside the wall, nails half used, wood still needing paint. Jack sat on the porch alone. The stars high above him. Hank joined him, slow but steady, lowering himself into his usual chair with a groan. "She'd be proud of you," Hank said, voice rough. Jack looked over. "Who?" "Molly," Hank said. "Tom's mother, my wife. She passed 2 years ago." He paused, staring at nothing. She never gave up hope. Held on to it like a prayer. Used to say that one day someone would come back. Someone worth loving again. Hank chuckled softly. "I argued with her, told her to stop wishing on ghosts. But now I think maybe she wasn't waiting for Tom. Maybe she was waiting for you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside, a faded picture of a young woman with kind eyes. "I kept this," he said, "for someone who'd earn it." He held it out. Jack didn't move at first. Then slowly, almost with trembling fingers, he took it. He held it close to his chest, like something sacred. "I'll never be your son," Jack said. "You don't have to be," Hank replied. "You're not his shadow. You're you, and you've earned your place in this family." Jack swallowed hard. He didn't speak. Couldn't. That night, as the heat faded and the sky turned gold at the edges, Marion walked up the path to Hank's porch. She saw them sitting together, one man old and tired, the other silent and steady. She stepped onto the porch. Jack stood. As he always did, she raised a hand before he could speak. "Let me go first," she said gently. She took a breath. Her hands were at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling like she wasn't quite sure what to do with them. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life waiting for Tom," she said. "That no one could ever fill the space he left behind." She paused. "But now I know I'm not waiting anymore." Her voice wavered just enough to break something in Jack's chest. "I'm not looking for who I lost," she said. "I see you. I know what you've done for this town. For these people, for us." Jack opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "I'm not offering forgiveness," she said. "There's nothing to forgive. You didn't lie. You simply showed up. In a place that needed someone, even if nobody knew they were waiting." She stepped forward. Jack didn't move, and then her hand found his, slow, steady. She didn't pull away. In that simple, quiet touch, there was more truth than in any name he'd ever carried. Time passed in Masonville, the way time always does in small towns. Slowly at first, like it's testing the water. Then all at once, like the seasons deciding to change overnight, the buildings were patched. The schoolhouse roof, once sagging and broken, now held strong through rain and sun. Kids played under. Every afternoon, their laughter echoing down the dusty streets. The old saloon stood tall again, too. But it wasn't the kind of place it used to be. No more whiskey sour card games or slammed fists on splintered tables. Jack had rebuilt it. From the inside out, not to make a living, but to make a place. At night, the lanterns glowed soft through the windows. Young folks came to play music on worn guitars, to share stories, to plan the future instead of mourn the past. The kind of space where people didn't whisper about ghosts, but spoke about tomorrow. Jack never said much. He just kept showing. Up. He still rose before the sun. Tended horses behind the blacksmiths, brought fresh water to the schoolhouse. Fixed door hinges without being asked. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't need it. Out near the edge of town, where there used to be nothing but dry grass and a few broken fence posts, a new sign had been put up. Jack Caldwell's writing. School, it wasn't fancy. Just a hand-painted board with study letters. Beneath it, a corral built by hand, rails lined straight, a handful of horses trained with patience. Not power. Jack taught the children how to ride. Not just how to sit. Taller steer with the reins, but how to listen. How to breathe in time with the animal. How to lead without forcing, guide without fear. One morning, a little girl asked him, Did you grow up riding horses? Jack paused, then smiled, just a little. No, he said. I grew up becoming someone who could. She didn't understand. But someday she might. Hank came by often now, riding in his old cart, sitting by the rail and watching the kids learn. His eyes softer than they used to be, less filled with what you lost, more with what had been found. Marianne was always nearby too. They didn't speak much in public. They didn't need to. When Jack walked by, he'd reach for her hand. When she smiled, he'd feel it like sun on his skin. They were just together, not with big promises or loud declarations. Just quiet moments, a table set for two, a shoulder brushed by accident and left there on purpose, a porch swing that creaked gently as the sky turned pink in the evenings. People didn't call him Tom anymore. No one even brought the name up. He was Jack Caldwell. Not a soldier, not an outlaw, not a replacement for someone else's son. He was a man who came from nothing, walked into a town that never asked for him, and stayed until he earned every inch of it. One warm afternoon, Jack found himself back behind the church, standing in front of the grave that bore Tom's name. The stone was clean, the grass around it neat. Someone, maybe Marianne, maybe Hank, still tended it. Jack took off his hat. He crouched down. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he whispered, I didn't live your life. I didn't wear your uniform. I didn't love her the way you did, but I love her now, in my own way. And I hope that's all right. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. I didn't mean to become part of your story, Jack continued. But somehow your story gave me mine. You gave me a place to become someone better. And I promise I'll protect what you left behind. He stood slowly. Let the silence settle. I don't carry your name, but I carry your purpose. And that, he knew, was what mattered. That night, Marianne met him on the porch. She didn't knock. Just stepped up with a small bundle in her hands. Cloth-wrapped, worn, familiar. What's this? Jack asked. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a book. Handwritten pages, notes, letters, journal entries. Tom kept it, she said. Before he left, I never read all of it. I wasn't ready. Jack looked at the pages. The pen strokes steady, sometimes shaky. Thoughts about the town, about Marianne, about leaving, about maybe never coming back. Finish it, she said. Softly, not as him, as you. Jack didn't answer right away. But his eyes said enough. Over the next few weeks, Jack wrote. A little each night, thoughts, lessons, things he'd learned from horses, from children, from a town that gave him more than he ever deserved. Not about where he came from, but where he had chosen to stay. The final page was simple. I didn't find my past, I found my purpose. And in the end, maybe that's more than enough. Time moved on. New families arrived. The children Jack taught grew taller, steadier in the saddle. The saloon stayed open. The riding school grew. And the name Jack Caldwell, once a question, became a story the town told with pride. Not a ghost, not a lie. A man who showed up, stayed, and became something real. And when people asked about him, they didn't speak in whispers. They said, he wasn't born here, but he belongs here. Because in the end, he didn't become the town's hero because he wore the right name. He became their hero because he chose to, because he stayed, because he loved, because he became.